It's not always about frame data and hitboxes. These are the stories behind the faces on the character select screen and why we keep coming back to them. These are the Fighter Files. Over 500 years ago, Shao Kahn's conquest of Earthrealm had become inevitable. The Elder Gods had set the rules of Mortal Kombat to contain Outworld's onslaught, but they had failed. Even Edenia, greatest of all realms, had lost 10 consecutive tournaments against Kahn's champions. Earthrealm was weaker, poorer, and had less technology and magic. Even their protector, Raiden, was amongst the weaker gods. All hope had left this realm. On the eve of the 10th Earthrealm tournament, what few champions Earthrealm still had began the inexorable march to their doom. They would be the first to die, followed soon by family, friends, anyone they had ever known. It would be their homes that were ransacked, their fields that were scoured, their children that would be slaughtered and enslaved. This was a grim reality, so they faced it just as grimly. All their souls would soon be forfeit to Shao Kahn's champion, Shang Tsung. The treacherous Shang Tsung's name would reduce even the bravest of warriors to tears. The Mortal Kombat tournament had been held every 50 years, once per generation. For 9 generations, Shang Tsung had murdered every challenger. No, murder would have been merciful. Murder implies the torture ended there. Right before a challenger drew their final breath, Tsung would use his sorcery to rip their souls from their bodies. Tsung would take their very essence into his own body. They were still aware. For as long as Shang Tsung was alive, they would know what was happening. But the victims had no voice. They had no mouths to scream with, no eyes to weep from, no eyelids to shield their gaze. A warrior would have to watch their family go through the very same torture, be stitched into the same gestalt, and couldn't do a single thing about it. Their souls had become fuel for the flames of damnation. Shang Tsung was without mercy. Shang Tsung was without weakness. Shang Tsung was without the limits of a mortal man. For as long as he was champion of Mortal Kombat, the sands of time overlooked him. He was ageless, forever in his prime, at the height of his powers. To face Shang Tsung was worse than any death sentence, worse than any hell. The type of terror that gave the gods pause and made the beasts cower. Even the mightiest warrior would look upon Shang Tsung and despair. All except for one champion, a monk that had the fire of the sun in his eyes. He was not meant to be there, but had instead volunteered on behalf of his order, the White Locust Society. The warriors he traveled with assumed the monk to be naive in the ways of the world. What would a man that walked the enlightened path possibly know about death and dismemberment? This monk's name was Kung Lao. A few short hours later, the sun would rise over the desolate island that housed this tournament. The night before, the Earthrealm warriors were loud. They cried for family they'd never see again, prayed to gods that would never answer them. Even Raiden himself had begged for a salvation that wouldn't be delivered. The warriors were loud the night before, but with the dawn, there was silence. Except for the monk. Kung Lao was silent, yes, but he had been silent during the night as well. While everyone else wallowed, he had been meditating. At some points, he had even been smiling. The other warriors already thought little of Kung Lao. Now they almost despised him. How dare he be so cavalier about their doom? Had he been so pampered as to not even have the faintest idea of what awaited them all? When Kung Lao volunteered to fight first, there was almost a sense of relief amongst the others. At least they would all get to see this foolish monk die first. For 9 generations, the warriors of Earthrealm had been broken by Shao Kahn's monsters. 450 years of slaughter. Now, on the day Shang Tsung was set to win the tournament and take the realm for his master, Kung Lao stepped forward to oppose him. The rest of Earthrealm's warriors were surprised to see Kung Lao survive the first round. Not just survive, no, he won handedly. Some may have scoffed at his refusal to execute the loser. Surely that was a sign of this monk's weakness. Yes, the victory had to be a fluke, a mistake, some cosmic joke. Then Kung Lao won in the second round, and then the third, and then the semifinals. Any other Earthrealm warrior would have been maimed at this point, yet Kung Lao was still standing. The monk had done what generations of barbarians, soldiers, gladiators, kings, sorcerers, ninjas, conquerors, and demigods had failed to do. Kung Lao was nothing special. He wasn't the fulfillment of a prophecy or a promise from some benevolent god. He didn't have a drop of regal blood, hadn't led armies or defeated monsters. Kung Lao was a normal human being. He led a humble life, wore the robes of a farmer, and spoke with no eloquence or refinement. Kung Lao was just a man. One small, insignificant man, an insect in the grand construct. Yet here he stood. The battle was brief, almost comically so. Shang Tsung, killer of thousands, was defeated. No one, from the lowliest of servants to God Raiden himself, believed that anyone could defeat Shao Kahn's champion. Raiden had sought out champions of his own, nobility and generals, only for the savior of Earthrealm to be an unassuming monk. Kung Lao did not boast in adulation. He did not bow to an adoring crowd. Instead, he offered a hand to Shang Tsung before walking away. Anyone else would have killed the soul-stealing worm for all the pain he had caused. But Kung Lao wasn't that way. Revenge was an earthly vice, and he was a man of higher standing. Earthrealm had been saved. Even the gods had abandoned them to their fate, and yet their hero was a being of blood and bone. Every nation, every person on the planet would have bowed to Kung Lao as their king, but he would never allow it. The savior of Earthrealm went back to his monastery, back to learning and training with his fellow monks. To Kung Lao, no one deed carried more or less weight than any other. His deed of defeating Shang Tsung was no more worthy of praise than aiding an injured animal back to health, or providing bread to a hungry child. Kung Lao hadn't defeated Shang Tsung for glory, for riches, for fame or acclaim. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. 50 years after his victory was the next time almost anyone saw the monk, as he returned to the island to defend his championship. Kung Lao hadn't aged a day in those 50 years, a gift bestowed upon any reigning Mortal Kombat champion. Shang Tsung hadn't been so lucky. Though he still appeared far younger than his 5 centuries of life would entail, he now had the body of a man in his 70s. He was no longer Shao Kahn's champion. Shang Tsung was now meant to oversee the tournament and Outworld's new champion, Goro. Kung Lao fought valiantly, but Goro was unlike any foe he had ever faced. Kung Lao would lose. 50 years before, Kung Lao showed mercy to Shang Tsung. Shang Tsung would now take Kung Lao's soul, yet another victim of the sorcerer. Shao Kahn expected this to break the will of Earthrealm. It would take time to regain 10 consecutive wins, but that time would pass. Earthrealm just saw their greatest champion be shattered. Surely there was no coming back from that. But Shao Kahn was mistaken. Kung Lao's soul had been stolen, yes, but not his memory, not his legacy. A monk had ended the apocalypse by himself. The impossible, for one fleeting moment, became reality. The hope that inspires, the hope that brings about, it can survive 100 generations. To defeat Shao Kahn again, it would only have to last 10. Kung Lao's monastery would dedicate itself to training a champion that could avenge Kung Lao and reverse the inevitable once again. In 500 years' time, they would see such a hero emerge. Liu Kang, the man who would defeat Goro, Shang Tsung, and even Shao Kahn himself. Kung Lao's name would be carried by many men of his bloodline, including the Kung Lao that fought alongside Liu Kang against Outworld. His legacy had endured, and would continue to do so for centuries. In time, his soul would even be freed when Raiden killed Shang Tsung. It was that legacy of hope that would, across time and space, be echoed by a different Liu Kang. Liu Kang, god of thunder and fire, would reconstitute creation itself to be built on the same ballots that the great Kung Lao lived by. Liu Kang's first action in this new world was to finally meet the man that had saved everything to ever exist. Kung Lao wouldn't have to fight in this new world, but his wisdom and humility would be a gift to Liu Kang, a way to keep a god human. In the new timeline, Kung Lao would die of natural causes. Due to there being no war with Outworld, his name wouldn't be revered the way it had in an older world. That's not to say Lao's life wasn't important, or needed, or that the optimism he brought didn't have the same meaning. Quite the opposite. It shows what made Kung Lao special. Liu Kang had crafted a just world, one that didn't fear death or war. It was a happy world. It doesn't take anyone a great effort to be peaceful in a life without war, to be joyful in a world built atom by atom to be joyful. Anyone could be happy in a just world. Kung Lao, however, had hope in a hopeless world, joy in a joyless life. Anyone can be happy in a world that makes sense. It takes true strength to have hope in a world that, at every turn, wishes to rip it away from you, in a land where the gods themselves had abandoned all hope. Kung Lao endured. Kung Lao wasn't a god, he wasn't a legend, he wasn't a myth, but he was something rare, something so often overlooked in a cynical world. Kung Lao was a good man.